Welcome back, everyone, to the Chip Lunch podcast. It is wonderful to have you along with us, as always. And I have a regular co-host, Braden, with me. How are you?
Good to be back.
Good to be back. That's good.
Yeah.
That jumper jacket, looks very warm.
It is very warm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Speaking of jackets, you've got a very nice jacket on. Tim, our guest on the Chip Lunch podcast today. How are you?
Hello, boys. How are you going?
Excellent.
That's what I want to hear.
Very exciting.
Get excited.
Get excited. I'm excited for the Chip Lunch. It's lovely to have you on here.
Thanks.
You hassled me last week about being on, so I'm like, let's do it.
Oh, yeah. Some people asked me before, so that's not.
Well, you've already had one of your daughters has done it.
Yes.
And also your wife.
Yes.
So we're going to make it the full set and get your other daughter. I was going to say sister. Your other daughter.
Yeah, she's
Courtney
my
on.
daughter. Yeah. So
so.
the full tribe. I've actually had the son-in-law as well, both.
Oh yes, he has been on too.
So,
James has been on as well. Wow. So we might need to get everyone on.
Yeah.
Then make you the first family that everyone's done the Chip Lunch.
So we'll just have to work on courts. That's it.
Yeah. Just get Courtney on. It's wonderful to have you along. You are saying that this is your lunch break for today, which is great. And when we release that, no one knows when we're actually recording it. So
Correct.
it could just, just be 5 p.m.
Exactly.
You've been working all day.
It's been hard.
Jeez, yeah. You look pretty worn out.
Oh, I tell you.
Tim, it's great to have you on. Let's ask the first question, which is, how do you like to have your hot chips?
It's changed over time, but honestly, my fondest memories are when we were little, when they had things like newspapers, and I know that's for the younger folk. It's a novel idea.
Paper.
Yes, paper where it had like words and stuff on it, and you used to carry it around your arm. So we'd go to my grandparents, and they would bring a pile of chips wrapped in newspaper, and it would have salt, and then I would put. And my grandfather liked vinegar on it, so I just loved having salty chips, like thick salty chips, not crinkle cut.
Oh, you like them thick?
I like the thick cut chips with the salt and the vinegar, and that's always been my favourite. Though I don't mind a bit of chicken salt. I know people are I'm a bit agnostic when it comes to salt, so I'm not an evangelist, but I don't mind either way. It's pretty good. I'll take it as it comes. But salt and vinegar is my favourite. Yeah.
Any sauce as well?
Look, I think it's a bit Neanderthal.
Oh, that's a controversial comment.
But I will occasionally I'll have it, but it's more someone else in my family enjoys having sauce. I like the purity of and the simpleness of vinegar and salt and chip.
The simplicity of the chip.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. And is there a particular place that you're like, that's the place to get chips from?
I don't really do that anymore. We don't go actually have too many fish and chips anymore. So I really can't tell you. So there would have been somewhere around Cronulla Ways where we used to go and get that sort of stuff. Or my grandparents are from the Gold Coast, so I was from there where we used to go and get fish and chips. So not particularly, though. I do if I'm going to go out to a restaurant and I'm going to have chips. I like the thick cut chips. I don't like the crinkly chips. And I don't like the really thin ones. I like nice and thick and beer batter.
With a lot of potato.
Yeah, I like something a bit hearty.
Yes, you're a hearty man.
Yeah, I am, as you can tell.
And you just mentioned your grandparents twice there. Does that mean you have lots of nice memories with them, like going to the beach and getting fish and chips and things like that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, when I was younger, I grew up in Queensland. My family come from there, so we moved down here. And I'm not even going to tell you the year, but it was at a certain age, and when I was young. We used to go down there every weekend. We used to live in Brisbane, and we'd travel down to the Gold Coast. And I used to stay with my grandparents. He had a boat. We used to go out and we go fishing all the time. Right. So it was a pretty good life back then. Do
you get to fish much now?
Not as much as I'd like.
Yeah.
To be honest, I haven't. I've also discovered drones, which I'm having a bit of fun with.
Oh, okay. Fishing with drones?
Well, I've been actually flying over fisher folk with not over them, but next to them. So on the Warranora, I go down the Wani and launch the drone, and then I can actually follow boats around. I'm just doing it for a bit of practice. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'm having a bit of fun with
getting up your drone pilot skills.
Yeah, that's correct.
How good. Next question that we always like to ask, though, and we've heard a little bit of your background, but I'm sure it'll play into the answer for this question. How did you become a Christian? Okay, so I'll give you two periods, but the early period. So I grew up. My dad he
gone to church and all the rest of it, and he was keen to get us away from the church, to be honest. He thought it was all a bit rubbishy. Mum was still committed, and then they got divorced, and I was with Mum. Dad was off doing other things, so we kept going to down at Cronulla actually, and I got into a confirmation class, and that's really where I really understood what the gospel was about. So I became a Christian sort of there, even though I'd been around youth groups and all the rest of it. Didn't really sort of get it until then, and then I was a pretty solid Christian up until towards the end of high school, and then I'd really sort of had enough of it, and it made you unpopular, and you couldn't have fun. Girls didn't really like that sort of thing. So I sort of acted as not a Christian for a couple of years, and then probably when I was about 23 maybe, I sort of realised that it was pretty empty, all that stuff. It was exciting and fun at the time, not going to lie to you. And then I realised that living that life where I was not going to church, and I was keeping away from Christians, I realised at the end of it how empty that was. And so I started to come back to church irregularly, and then I sort of recommitted, if that's the term. I know it's a Christian-y term, but I sort of came back to the fold, I suppose, for a better way. And I had it was a good thing because I understood a bit better about how things were. We'd been pretty, my mum was very protective and didn't want me to do certain things, and wasn't keen on exploring life. So I went and did it myself. This is after Mum had remarried, and I was living with my stepfather at the time. So that was a bit rocky too. And I think part of it was I was a bit of a rebellion to that. But also I really wanted to understand what it was all about, because I'd heard all these other people having great fun, not really understanding it. So I thought I'd have a bit of fun too. Why wouldn't you? But there's also a price to pay for that, and you don't realise it until later, that everything that seems good and great and fun, there's a cost to that, to you personally and to others around you. So something that I learnt along. But then I sort of came back, started going back to church irregularly at first, and then towards the end of my uni was back doing what I should have been doing.
What was? Is there something that sticks in your mind that you're like, this isn't what I want to do, and you wanted to go back to exploring being a Christian?
I look, there's lots of things that come to mind, but really, the world's a harsh place. So and people's views of how the world should work are quite different to the way that the gospel works in Christian thought. And so there's not a lot of care, and as for you as a person, it depends what group you go into, but there's expectations on you to behave in certain ways and believe certain things and sprout certain ideas that aren't Christian, and also they can be quite damaging in terms of, the boring stuff about alcohol and drugs and all that sort of stuff. Of course, there's that culture. So there's all sorts of different cultures that are out there that aren't explicitly Christian, and the Christian culture is quite unique really Christianity is quite unique in the way that it approaches and sees the world. It doesn't see the world as a singular finite event. It sees it as a continuous event. It sees us not as people who come and live. You want to be here for. Are you here for a long time or for a good time? Is some of the thinking out there? Well, that all makes sense if you start at birth and then you die. But if you have a different perspective on that, an eternal perspective, you realise that life goes on past the grave, whether you're a Christian or not. So the question is, where are you going to be post everybody dies, post your death? Where are you going to be? What's that going to look like for you? So to pretend that it doesn't exist is foolish, but it also drives the way people behave and live, because without hope, there's no concept that anything I can do whatever I want. I am my own person. I don't need to be told by people how I should behave or what I should do, because there aren't any consequences at the end. It's only my personal consequences of people around me. How I affect others is of no importance. So I think that thinking, and it was about the self and about maximising pleasure, and the money component is just all part of that. This idea that I'm an autonomous individual that exists at this point in time in history, and I have nobody. I'm not responsible to anybody, and nobody can affect me, which is not true. And I think the Christian gospel's pretty clear on that. You are born, you do die, you pass on. Everybody does. It's just what happens on the other side of that. And I think that perspective's been lost. And I think one of the reasons that I think we're seeing what's happening with the ABS today and the statistics on number of Christians, I think that's a recalibration of what it's probably really like. It may actually drop lower. Because Jesus said narrow is the gate. He didn't say it was wide. Yeah. But also the rise in people in mental illness as a growth in society, partly because it's being recognised where before it wasn't, but also I think it's because of the anxiety of not knowing who I am or what I should be. I think that creates that angst, that existential angst that is in society. And I think a Christian perspective gives you a lot of peace. Now, it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve everything in your life. God doesn't promise that your life's going to be perfect, because it isn't. And I've gone through ups and downs just recently, as have people in my family. It's not a golden ticket to nirvana, even though it's the wrong religion. But it does give you an understanding, and a real understanding of what people are like. And I think the biggest problem that we have in society isn't a social problem, and you can, if you go to social media, it just spews at you like a fire hose all the different existential thoughts, which are really old postmodernist thinking, that we can redefine our own worlds and create it by the use of language. But it does, and the whole concept that we make society better by educating people. Well, that's actually a theological question, and the question is, what makes a person? Because if you understand what makes a person, then you somehow can then make society better. Now, the Christian, if as a Christian, we understand that at our heart we're rotten, we're sinful, and we need help, and that's why Jesus came, and that's why he died, and that's why he was resurrected. And he died for us because God is love, and he loves everybody, and he offers everybody the same choice. But what he didn't say is that we're all good, and the only way that the way to fix society is just to keep educating you, because if you just keep educating you, you'll do better at what you're doing, because you are an innocent in this great malaise of life. And education will fix your problem, and if it fixes your problem, it'll fix society. Now, that's not the Christian worldview at all. We aren't all good. We don't start out as innocent children, sinless. We actually start out with original sin, and as a result of that, education ain't going to fix that. There's something else that has to come in and step in from outside of our universe to fix that, and that's the cross. That's how that all comes together. And the philosophy around that thinking about Christ-centered thinking about the cross and the importance of that in our lives has been lost on a lot of people. They don't get it. I mean, the 43% I found fascinating because, and I'll use an example. I had a person who I knew them through a work context, and they quoted, the love verse that everybody quotes at weddings at the time, Corinthians 13, I think it is. And I said, "Oh, that's from Corinthians," and she goes, "What's a Corinthian?" She had no context or concept of. She had no idea what it is, and I think we've. One of the things that we're going to have to work on is retelling the Christian story. We haven't told the Christian story, and it's a good story, right? Yeah. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's a story that gives hope where there isn't. It shines light into darkness. So from my perspective, as I've been thinking about all these things, I think as Christians, sure, it's sobering to hear what's going on out there in society and how society is sort of pulling it apart, pulling what we used to, all the institutions that we relied on over our lives apart and changing them, changing the way we educate. When I grew up, it was about your character. We don't talk about character anymore. But character is one of those key things about who you are as a person.
Yeah, I agree.
And how you're shaped as to how you're going to affect others. Because back then they knew that if you could get someone and shape their character young, that the benefits of that for everybody. So that type of education's being lost now. It's being turned into short courses, and it's being turned into the whole idea if something is wrong with society, you fix it through education, and it's a one-horse it's a one-trick pony. There's no other tricks to deal with that. Yeah,
I was just looking up that verse that you're talking about, 1 Corinthians 13. It starts at verse 4, but it's there's some hash browns being
oh.
Well, love is patient, love is kind.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much, Gareth. We've had some hash browns delivered on the podcast, which we can take part on here at Soul Revival Church. We have a meal at a certain time of the day, because I don't want to give away when you had your lunch break there, Tim.
It is getting towards night eventually.
Yeah, that's right. So that verse is love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So it's funny that people, like you're saying, identify with that, but then they don't know where it's come from and don't know who a Corinthian was or where Corinth was, which is kind of funny.
No.
All those things that you talked about, though, Tim, were that the things that you were grappling with when you decided, oh no, I need to go back to the church? Because was the character thing important, or what? Yeah, did that influence your thinking about?
Well, I think yes, in terms of the nihilism of it all.
Okay.
So the good old Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, he's a great guy. The postmodern thinking and the nihilism. So it was around there is only this life. Yeah. So one of my friends who's a chaplain, and he's a good bloke, Steve. He always says, some people are here for a good time, not for a long time. Yeah. And that all makes sense if your theological position is there is nothing post-death. The other reason is people don't even realise they hold theological positions, even though they do. And I think that's something that we should think about when we speak to other people and point that out. Maybe not even using those terms, but the consequences of that. And if everything is nihilist and there is no, our path in life is to suffer and there is no meaning, then a lot of the behaviour you see around the world is perfectly understandable and reasonable. But if that isn't true, if there is something post our passing, and if we are all eternal beings, and if there is a God, then that changes everything. Your thinking changes, your view on life changes. It's all impacted by that. And what I've noticed even today, I mean, back then it was there, but not quite as pronounced. But here, I mean, I don't know if you guys listen to podcasts, you see social media, YouTube, all the rest of it. It's like, postmodernism's being sprayed at us like a fire hose, and we're drowning in it. We don't even realise that it's actually invaded all our thinkings. And to get the Christian mind and cross a Christian perspective on life is a very powerful thing, because it's so unusual today. It's very, very unusual.
We talked about recommitting. What do you think changed in your life once you recommitted, and then you said you were going to church irregularly? And then when did that become regular? And then what did you see in that, like, working in your life?
Well, it's interesting. I had been involved in a beach mission earlier in my life, and I'd started going back to the church where that had all started.
What church was that, by the way?
That was Cronulla, actually.
Cronulla Anglican?
Yeah, Cronulla Anglican. I started going back to Cronulla Anglican. And I started to get more regular. And then they said the beach mission was coming up, and which is the Rock. And they said, some of the people who knew me said, would you like to come back on team? And I was sort of a bit conflicted because I thought it was only, I hadn't, when I say I wasn't a Christian, I knew it all. And it was all weighing on me in guilt and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like I should, but then they kept encouraging me. And so I said, yeah, okay. And it was actually on that day that I think it was the last day of the Rock or the second day of the Rock. So I came back and I got right into it. I was involved, I was attending. And I'll tell you this little funny story. So I think it was the last day of the Rock, and one of my mates was going from, the non-Christian mate is going, come on, you need to come and see. I can't remember. It was one of the Star Trek movies. And he's going, come on, no, don't go to the Rock. Come to Star Trek with me. And he's going, come on, you want to. And he's going, God or Spock. God or Spock. And it was pretty funny. And we were just, he's geeing me up. And I said, I'm really sorry. I'll choose God tonight. Right, so I did, right? And I'm still I did see the movie, I think. Eventually. Yeah, so it was God or Spock, so I went God.
Well, that's the title for this episode.
Yeah. and that night, while we were at Cronulla, I don't know if you've been up to Cronulla recently.
Yeah.
You went on Sunday?
Yeah.
Out the front, there's of the hall. So the Rock used to be in the hall. So in the hall, there's like a little, patio area, and there's the doors entry into the hall, and to the left there's a glass window that opens up, and that's where they used to be serving what we used to have back then was really, radical stuff, because, being Christians, we had coffee and like instant and raisin toast. I mean, that was like, we were
good stuff.
We were right into that, right into it. Anyway, so I went up there, and while I was there, it's a long story, but I met Jen on that day.
Your wife?
So I went God or Spock, chose God, went to the Rock and met Jen. Jen had a piece of sand or grit in her eye or something.
Oh,
and I was very
a twinkle in her eye.
No, I had a smooth action. And I just went, I've got 20/20 vision. Let me get that out of you.
No, come on.
And then the rest is history. So on that point, there you go. So there's a cosmic moment of choice.
Yeah.
Right, presented. And I chose to go one way, and if I'd chosen to go the other way, I would never have met Jen. I would never have had my kids. Probably wouldn't be here. So isn't that interesting? Now, I think about that quite a lot, and that's, really that's the finger of God reaching into your life and touching you at a certain point and giving you a choice. Right? Because God's a gentleman. He's not going to force you to do it. He's going to give you that choice. If he's chosen you, you'll choose right. I chose, and, gazingo, here I am, married, 2 kids, and they're married. So 2 new lives have been created, and potentially newer lives. With the girls.
Was that something that was important to you? Like, you obviously it seems that kind of legacy and almost a Christian influence legacy is really important to you. Because is that something that you wanted to change from your own personal experiences?
Yeah, look, I did. I think for me, I've got a responsibility as dad and as a father and as a husband, and I take those seriously. And for me, that's my job, right? It's my job. So if I'm given a job, I do it, and I do it well, and I do it to the best of my ability. And with the boys, I actually sat down and talked to them about it before they married my girls. And at the weddings, I had a speech that I told them, but it was nothing I hadn't spoken to them about. And I said to them, it's really simple. If you go back to Genesis, a man and woman come together and they leave their parents and they become one. And I said, my responsibility up until the point that the girls say I do is their father. I am there to love them, care for them, protect them, provide for them. But at that point, I hand that responsibility over to you as their husband, and you take on that responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean, so whilst I'm no longer responsible, I'm still interested. So that was, I told them before the wedding, and I told them in the speech, because I think it's important that, we take that seriously. I actually also told them both that, if you're not Christians, you will not get my blessing. Because for me, I want the girls to be handed into the hands of someone who's going to love them properly and to carry on the legacy that we've been given. Because we only exist as Christians from generation to generation. We need to hand that legacy to the next generation and fulfill our role in this generation. So Christianity will only keep continuing if God, through his people, passes that legacy down. So for me, that was like, as I said, it's biblical and for me a sacred duty that I'm actually was passing down to the boys. Now, we chose well. The girls chose well. And I'm very happy with both of them. I love both of them and I love my girls. So for me, that was it was a very hard thing to do because I do love my girls. And to hand them on to someone who isn't me, there's a bit of trusting, but so far so good. They've proven themselves to be men of integrity, and that's something I asked them to be, and they've been living up to the vows. Because the other thing for me is about today people make promises and with no intention of keeping them, and or no understanding of why it's important to keep them. Because if life is about me, why shouldn't I just make life about me, and I'll make a promise because it suits me and I'll get away with something or not.
You don't have to take, you're talking about responsibility there. Like
Correct.
It's almost like not having to take responsibility for that. I think that was something that I missed as a young man too. It was messages of, no, you can do whatever you want and not have to suffer any consequences kind of thing. And I don't think I went out and did that on purpose, but I feel like my life changed a lot when I realised I needed to take responsibility for my actions, especially as a male. And I really like hearing like that's what's so important to you as well. I was going to ask you the question though, that why do you see responsibility as being so important? Is that you've spoken about like kind of a we're almost like a postmodern society now nowadays, and is that was it like a reaction to what you're seeing in the world, and then being a Christian and going, this, we need to double down on this kind of thing, like we need to be super responsible, we need to take responsibility for these very things? Or was it, I didn't take responsibility early in my life and I'm glad that I did, becoming a Christian? Or did you want to change something that you had experienced in your life and you go, these people didn't take responsibility for me or for their actions, so I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen going on?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things, I think Jen mentioned it, is my parents were divorced. My father was doing what he wanted to do, and he basically left us with no... While there was input, it was limited, and it was like show up to the cricket match. And pay some money towards mum. And I'm not saying that he was that he did anything particularly wrong to us. It's just that he didn't fulfil his role as a father as he should have. And the thing about vows I was mentioning before, when you actually make your wedding vows, they're actually sacred vows because you're making them before God and before people. You can't just toss them away if they become inconvenient. And for me, when Jen and me got married, we said that whole thing is going to stop with our generation. It's stopping with us.
Yeah, I remember Jen saying the same thing.
And we're not going to let that go any further. That was one of the earlier conversations I had. Because if you don't stand for something, you will fall for everything. And our responsibility, and the biblical model of manhood is there is leadership, and there is loyalty, and there is commitment, and there's love, and there's all those things. And I think we should, rather than being sad or embarrassed to be men, we should be godly men. And that sounds a bit wimpy. We need to be biblical men of how God wants us to be, and He gives us models for that. Yep. And I really want to see young men take that up. One of my things is, I want to encourage young men to be who they are truly under God, because they don't always get it at home, or some of them never get it at home. And a lot of people are lost because they don't have any examples to follow. Now, there's biblical examples, terrific biblical examples of how you should behave and what you should do. Start with Jesus, the best one. But there's more flawed examples, which are more like us, which I don't mind. Like David was particularly flawed, and we all are. And I don't like the Christian, sometimes the fairy floss and lollipops view of Christianity, that, you become a Christian and everything comes terrific and there's no problems anymore and it's so easy and all the rest of it. Well, it's not. It's hard. It's hard to be a Christian in this society. It's hard to be a Christian, period, because we're living in a world that doesn't respect Christ. I've lived through a period where Christianity was actually a positive in society and welcomed, and everybody said they were. And I've seen it, in my lifetime, I've seen it's gone from positive, accepted, central to society, to indifference, and now to rejection. So I've seen the full thing, and it's only just starting on that slope. And I think we need to hold on to the promises that we're given through the Bible. We need to hold on to Christ as an example, to be countercultural, but theologically conservative. So we need to hold on to the truth of who Jesus is, why he came, and why God made us. Because the other thing that I really love is we aren't just random creatures. We were knitted. God knew us. When we were knitted in our mother's womb, he knew who we were, right? We're not just random creations. We're created in the image of God. And we have a responsibility to live up to what God has given us, the great gifts that he's given us. And I think that's a powerful message for men. Because sometimes people talk about, you're asking too much of men. No, I don't think we ask enough. Men want to be on mission. Men want to do stuff. Men want to achieve things. And there is an immense power in knowing your purpose.
I agree.
Right? And if we know our purpose and we know what we're here to do, nothing can stop us, because God will clear the path for it to happen if we're on his team and we're doing his purpose.
Well, you said that you said we need to be godly men, and that can be considered wimpy. I don't think it's wimpy at all, because really what we're called to do is love sacrificially, which just means give ourselves up for the people that we're responsible for. And I think that, like talking about like Jesus, how does it? I can't even speak properly today. But
can I just interrupt you? I wasn't saying that. I'm not saying that it is wimpy. I say the world will see it as such.
And exactly. But it's sacrificing yourself is seen as wimpy, not doing what you want to do. Right? Is
correct.
But then that's the description of Jesus in the relationship to these people is like is the picture of marriage. Right? Is that we're meant to present. Jesus' relationship to the church presents the church as a beautiful bride to God.
Yes.
Right? And we're meant to do the same thing with the people in our lives, is that we're meant to sacrifice ourselves just as Jesus did, maybe not on a cross, but use him as the model for that, like you said, and then to be able to love people sacrificially. And it can be seen as wimpy, like you're saying, but I don't think it is at all. To be like, I hopefully wouldn't say that Jesus is a wimp at all.
No. You're absolutely correct.
You're not saying that, but I think that like if we look at what Jesus has actually done, the guy was perfect.
Correct.
Wasn't he? And he's like, but then made himself at the bottom.
He made himself nothing. Yeah. Poured himself out. And I think that's right. But the people don't know Jesus. Our job's introduce him to Jesus, people to Jesus, and people don't know him and what he did, or they know him superficially and they don't understand what and I'll use the word cosmic moment because I love that word, the cross and the cosmic moment for the whole of history centres on that. And to think that you would allow yourself to be willingly nailed to a cross and to die in one of the most awful and horrible and ashamed, because it's a criminal's death. That takes, I won't say, but it takes a lot of
cojones.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And that example, in fact, that's why I also I also bridle against when people say it's heroic and all the rest of it. For me, I hate it when that word's used so glibly, because to me it has a specific meaning and it actually means something. And one of the things I think heroic acts revolve around another person and self-sacrifice. It shouldn't be about you. It should always be about others. And if you go back in time and you listen to some people who are actual heroes, you'll find that a lot of the time why they're so revered is because they did something for others that no one else would even think to do. That to me is hero. I mean, Jesus is the hero of all times because he was willing to give up everything for us. And I mean, to even think about that sometimes makes me a bit teary because I know I don't deserve it. Of all the people, I know how dark my heart is, and I know all the problems that I have inside myself just being who I am. And to understand that, and yet he still loves me. Now, there has been some great sermons recently at Soul Revival. You should look at those, particularly around the whole concept of Paul and how he came back from what he had been, a person who was terrorising the early church and murdering people, stoning them, and yet completely being transformed. That Paul is an example of that, where God comes into your life literally and miraculously and changes you. And we all have, may not be that sensational and that noteworthy, but we all have that point, I think, in our lives where God actually does come into our life, whether we know it or not, and actually starts to change us. But I think the honest thing to say is, do I have evil thoughts? Absolutely. You're not looking at a perfect person here, everybody, and I know no one believes that. Trust me, my wife can tell you stories. I think one of the things I would say is that I'm aware of that. I'm conscious of that, and we need to keep reminding ourselves of the need for forgiveness and to be honest about yourself. The best people the people I like most are people who are honest. They're straightforward, they tell you as it is, and they're honest. Those people have a good view of themselves, and they're an honest view of themselves. And we all need to think about how we can get to that point, because God sees us honestly. Right? We can't hide anything from God. We are like a pane of glass. He sees straight through, and he knows exactly who we are and what we've done. And we are only self-deluding ourselves if we think that God doesn't see or know what we're doing. And it's important to have that as a check in our minds, because we are accountable to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon, I feel like we've left you out of a conversation here.
I'm just enjoying listening.
Sorry.
You spoke a lot about generational change.
Yep.
Is there any ways, like you obviously took that into your life as a young person, how did you then look to move that on? Like you spoke a bit about how you've loved your daughters and the way that you chose to parent them. Is there a way through the church or through other people that you put that into action in terms of trying to reach out to those younger than you? How did that affect the way that you did that as a Christian?
Well, it was interesting. So I think I've had a positive impact. I can't say. Other people may have a different view of that, and I'm honest enough to say that. But a lot of the kids' friends, we had a lot of lots of conversations with them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm keen to get a bit more involved with Solies and do stuff. I've got my fire pit at home, which hopefully I want to take out for a bit of a run.
Excellent.
It's always good fun.
I like a fire pit.
And just talk about stuff honestly. I mean, I find so with the girls' friends, I've got relationships with a lot of them. I wouldn't say they're more like a parent of a Courtney or a Kate, but still, I can speak to them. Yeah. I try to speak to them when I get the opportunity. Though it's something to think about longer term. I'd like to do a little bit more work with young dads and stuff in church if I'm able to. Hopefully I can bring some benefit, but I'll leave it up for others to make that decision about whether that's a good idea or not. But I really want to see, personally, us become who we were meant to be, because we were designed and we were created and we were given purpose. And I hate to see young men and women not know their purpose because they're not going to get their best out of their life. because God's created a special purpose for every person. And I think that's the thing that I find that Christianity as a religion is so different in terms of thinking and philosophy, is this concept that you are a child of God. You're not just trying to appease an angry deity. You're actually a child of God who God wants to love.
And to mould.
And to mould, and to shape, and for you to fulfill your purpose for which you were created. And that, if you can grab hold of that in your life, will give joy to yourself and to others around you, because you're doing what you were designed to do. And I think one of the things that's happening in society is people doing things that they're not designed to do. And it's like the question I was asked, I've got put a nail into a piece of wood. I don't have a hammer, just pick up a rock and just bang it in. Well, sometimes that'll work and sometimes it won't. But if you use a hammer, every time it'll work. So people not knowing what they're designed to do, and they're lost because of this whole concept that we are here for a short time, maybe a good time, but not a long time. And that, to me, that whole philosophy impacts how people see themselves and how they either ignore God or see God in their lives.
I find that really cool. And have you been able to do that at previous times throughout your life? Because we're talking sometimes into the future, but we do like on the chip lunch to go over your past, and if you're willing to do that. But have you been able to do that? I mean, there's some stories that Jen shared on her podcast, on her actual episode, but I'd love to get your perspective on that, because I know that you've been very involved in youth and things like that as well over your time. I'm not going to make a guess at how old you are, but yeah, what's your involvement in that, and why did you do it?
Okay, so especially when we were first married, we used to have run Bible studies in our house, and there was like the locusts arrived, and just and the fridge was stripped, and the cupboard was stripped of all food, and we this is over in Wilpera, and it was really fantastic time for us. We really were. We had Courtney in the bassinet next to us, and we had the kids all on the floor chatting to us. They weren't kids, they were people not that much different in age to us at the time, only a few more years, and that was a wonderful experience. I loved doing that. I worked for Sydney City Mission for 5 years, and tried to I ran centres for unemployed people in work training and skills and all the rest of it. And I tried to work in that in my life, but it was very hard because we were up against broken people who really didn't. And the truth of the matter is, my impact there, sure, people got jobs and all the rest of it, and there were some people that I was able to positively impact. I won't mention any names, but I know that they ended up, their lives were changed by it, and I was really excited by that. And I think also when I was in The Rock, I loved doing that stuff. And then with the kids, just being with them and being their parents and loving them and bringing them up. But I think, have I done a lot with youth? I have earlier in my times, but not a lot recently. But you never know, the world could change. The thing for me, I just want to be where I should be. I talk about being designed and that we have purpose. Yeah. So God, I wanted God to sort of show where that will be. And sometimes you knock on a door, and you go through it and you realise that there's another door, and then you knock on that door and there's vegetables. But or it was the wrong door in the first place. Yeah. But right at the moment I'm trying to actually speak to Stu about some things that we could do. But I think a lot there's things that God has set before us that we don't even know about. And I mean I won't go into too many things like that time that again I'm using the term cosmic moment. Where God reached through history, right, and his finger touched us. Who knows what's coming ahead? The other thing is, if you're open and you're willing and you're faithful, things will happen. And sometimes better than you think. But we've been through our ups and downs too. I mean, society it's not an easy place to live in, and we've seen things that we wish we hadn't. But the confidence that I have is that regardless, whatever's going to happen, if God's in control, if people are if God is for us, who can be against us, right? That doesn't mean that you're not going to have people against you. It's just that you can know that God's going to be with you through it.
Can we talk about your career as well, and how being a Christian has influenced your career, because you said you worked at Sydney City Mission.
Yeah.
You also mentioned earlier you did uni, so I'd be keen to know what you did at uni and then what you kind of saw your career, because you had quite a few different jobs, so I'd like to dive in that a little bit.
All right. Well, my first job was I worked at an airline, which was it was very different, and it was. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. Like I'd walked into a place I had no reference point for, and because everything that I was told you shouldn't be doing or is not good for you was all happening in front of me. So,
right.
So, and I'm just going, wow, that was So you get sucked into that a little bit. Yeah. So I worked for that, and then I went to uni. I did environmental science.
Oh wow.
And then I went. I did environmental science, and I was tried to get a job, but at that time, there just weren't any jobs. I could get one day contracts, and I'd just come out of uni, and we were going to get married, so I had to get a job. So I ended up working at the mission, which I worked at for 5 years, and then and that was hard. So I was both. I ended up being the manager of 2 centres, but also assistant manager in others, and we had to spiritually lead the people there. The issue was that a lot of people who on team, there were some Christians, some who claimed to be Christians. Back then it was sort of okay.
Yep.
But the depth and the knowledge and commitment was variable. If that makes sense. And then I went from there and I worked at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Well, it's actually Australian business. I worked training people in. It was apprenticeship training, so I was trying to help people get jobs and stuff like that. And then I've spent the last since early 2000s. I've been working in emergency services, emergency management since about 2003.
What are you doing there with the emergency services?
Well, I worked in fire for about 10 years, and then 7 years with SES, and then I've now moved on into agriculture. So.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Biosecurity.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, from just that quick overview, I feel like you're often working in places where you really want to impact people and positively impact them. And we did already talk about that, but where do you think that impulse comes from? Is it being a Christian and saying we can impact these people in a way because of, I've been loved in the ultimate way by Jesus dying on the cross? Or is that the particular gifts that you think God's given you and that you're trying to use them as best as you can?
Look, it's a good question. The answer is, the truth to it is, I only do jobs where I can make an impact. You can see, when I look back at it, I'm not interested in just money, jobs that I do for money. There has to actually be a social impact that goes beyond me, because I believe I'm put here for a purpose. And so I don't want to talk on the podcast too much about it, probably a conversation for another time, but I've done some stuff that I'm really happy with, that I was given that opportunity.
Are you proud of that?
Yeah, and stuff that really has made a difference to people, and people wouldn't even know. Some of the stuff has resulted in probably people's lives being saved and a whole range of things. Yeah. But and I'm not claiming that I didn't go through burning buildings and stuff like that. But some of the stuff that we did. So, and for that meant a lot to me, because I felt, rather than just chasing the dollar, and there's no problem with people making money. God, that's one of the purposes of life, is to provide for your family. So I make no criticism. Anybody does that. But that's the sort of thing that motivates me. It's about what difference can I earn an income, and can I make a difference? And so that's been what's been important to me. And I think, yes, the Christian thing's good. I've always hooked in with the chaplains, whether it's at the fire or SDS, and I've got good friends of chaplains, and we talk about stuff. We used to pray for people and try and impact people in there. But it's very difficult working in that environment to be outwardly Christian, particularly in the current environment and how things are changing.
Is that because often in emergency services you're experiencing really high emotional things, or is it because being a Christian is seen as a little bit foreign or even almost dangerous sometimes. What's the reason for that?
It's difficult because the culture doesn't. It's not a culture that understands spirituality and purposes for people. Therefore, it's not valued or wanted, really. I'm not saying there aren't people who have spiritual beliefs or understandings, but it's not something that is something that will come up on a regular basis or be part or seen as a normal part of interaction. So you've got to be there, but you've got to be able to give an answer when asked. So that's the way that I look at it. Also, I try and make things happen for people if I know things will work without anybody knowing, if that makes sense.
What's an example of that?
Just arranging for things to occur in a certain order that will come to a certain outcome, but you can't see them unless you know that you're looking at it long
just
term.
pulling the strings.
Potentially.
You and Jen have been a big part of our community for a while now.
Seems like only like yesterday.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's why I was wondering, do you remember first coming to Seoul East? Do you remember what struck you? What made you want to stick around?
Yes. Okay. So it was interesting because Katie was the first Anderson to come along to Soul Revival, and the interesting story about that is because she went to LIT and and wanted to hear Stu speak because she'd heard what a great speaker Stu was, and I didn't know this, but apparently Stu had some influence at Menai when we were there in terms of trying to work to set up some sort of culture, but
it was kind of networking.
And there were some things that he'd put in place that they didn't understand, which was interesting until I got the philosophy of it. So that was interesting. So Katie first came here, and then Katie said, "Oh, you need to come, you need to do this." And then we noticed that she had a bit of a shine for one of the young men here, and was very keen. And so we had to do the family meet.
Stu and Stu's son.
yes, Ethan, and we had a meeting. It wasn't a meeting.
It's a formal meeting.
It wasn't a formal meeting.
Did you take minutes? Or?
No, we didn't do that. It was we went to, I think it was dinner at the Crawshaws, and we sat down.
Classic.
And it was lovely. It was a lovely dinner, and I sat down next to Pete and Stu, and we were having a bit of a yarn, and he said, "The only reason I'm really keen about your daughter is because you don't follow a football team, because I checked you out on Facebook." Because I don't even understand that game. It's a round ball or something.
Oh, wow, you're talking to two football.
I'd like to say something, a more derogatory term I'd use towards that game, but it would be unfair and unkind, so I won't do that. Mm-hmm. But the conversation started, so he told me that, and I went, "Oh, I've been stalked on Facebook." And I'm thinking, I'm the father of my daughter, so I was, pretty protective. I wanted to check that, things were right, that, we had good. I wasn't going to send her to a place where the theology wasn't good. So I needed to there's a bit of checking going on.
Yeah.
But what really was really interesting is I sat down next to Stu and we started talking about stuff when Spitfires came up, and I loved Spitfires. And then he started talking about Zulu, and I said, "It's my favourite movie. I love the Zulu." So we found out we had all these things in common and didn't know each other. And also found out that it was funny that Lou had been on the Rock and I'd been on the Rock.
Oh, right.
We didn't know that. So we found out we had all these things in common. And then Jen said, "Oh, we need to go and have a look." So we went and had a look, and I won't go into why, but we found out that we felt quite like this was where we needed to be. We went away overseas, and when we came back, we decided that we'd come full time. So that's what we did. So that was a couple of years back, not a long time when I think about it, not like, because we were at the other church since '99, so for a long time, but things sort of change. Sometimes what happens in life, I think, is you don't change, but things change around you.
Yeah.
And you don't even notice it. And then suddenly you look around and you think everything's different. And it's sort of what happened. But then we came here and we've been very loved and welcomed, and we've appreciated everything that Soul Revival offers, and particularly around the culture and the terrific preaching, and I like the ambience. It's great. Doesn't feel like a church, but it is. So there's a lot of things that we love about it, and the people, of course, we just love the people too. So we've been very blessed, and we're grateful for having the opportunity to come here. We're grateful that you were so welcoming and loving, and that you gave us a place that we can come to and feel welcomed, and we've got a lot of growing and warm friendships with people. So it's lovely.
That's good. You've also preached for us too. So like you do that pretty regularly. Why are you happy to get up and stand up in front of people and tell them about Jesus?
Well, I think I'm a bit of a tragic when it comes to studying the Bible. I'm a bit sad. I used to. I am, mate. I'm sad. I'd listen to CDs to and from Wollongong, so there would be an hour CD in the morning, an hour CD in the afternoon, and I'd do that for months and months on end. So I was always listening and absorbing.
CDs on what? Sorry.
On books of the Bible,
cool.
preaching, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is before I even thought about doing it.
Yeah.
I just loved it. I've never had, because I'm a trained. The other thing I didn't mention, but I've got I did my master's in education or adult education, and so I'm used to standing up in front of and talking, and so it's never been something that's concerned me. And so when you actually love something and you want to tell other people about it, it sort of was a bit of a natural fit. And Stu gave me a go, and I've enjoyed that. I haven't done it for a little while just because of some things with work. I've been working with the floods and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, right.
But hopefully I'll get back to doing that. And I think I'm just very grateful that I've been given the opportunity to do that. Wouldn't have happened in other places. I finished my certificate of theology as well, which was enjoyable. I really love doing that, and so I just like to learn, and then I just like to tell the story because it's a good story, and it's not just a narrative. It's actually the story, and it's a story that reaches back into the past and reaches into the future, and it touches every human being that has been born and that will be born, and is relevant to every human being right now. And for me, it's life-changing. It's not just another. We're not in a soccer club or a netball club or a playing card. None of those clubs. This isn't a club, right? This is a family, and it's a family that sits under God, and it exists because of what Jesus did. That's the reason it exists, and we're here to tell that story. And it's a story that changes lives, And isn't that what we're here to do? Isn't that what gives us purpose? Isn't that giving us meaning to why we are who we are? And as I said, it allows us to be who we should be. And for me, that's exciting and wonderful. And if I get to do that a bit more, even happy, I'll be really, really happy. And hopefully other people will appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you doing that.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
That's all right. Final question that we always like to ask, though, because we're coming towards the end of your lunch hour, is from what you know now as a Christian, what do you wish your younger Christian self knew when you look back on a number of things we've talked about in your life?
Well, for me, it's a really interesting question. I suppose when I was a younger Christian, I had no idea what society would look like now. No concept of it, right? I mean, I grew up, my first television was black and white, right? I mean, what's a computer? No one even heard of such a thing. So the world is, I think one of the things I'd be telling them is that even though the world will change around you and become something that you may not recognise, at the core of it, God doesn't change, right? He is the same as he was, as he will be forever. And to know that God is always consistent, he's consistent, and that he loves you, and that you can rely on him, and that you have a purpose that he's provided for you, you should hold on to that really hard, because that will get you through life. And no matter what happens to you, even if things you don't want to happen, and it is not a golden ticket to joy in terms of there'll be no problems, but it is a golden ticket to joy, because if you're living out your purpose, you will find joy, because you're being what you were created. You're doing what you were created to do, and that's gold.
Love that. Anything to finish up, Braden?
Oh, I just think it's so encouraging that we've asked you a bunch of questions today, and everything's just come back to God.
Yeah, it's true.
You know what I mean? I think it's just so encouraging to see how central he is to every decision that you've made in your life, everything that you're looking to, whether it's looking back or looking forward. it's just encouraging to see how focused you are on glorifying God in everything that you do and recognizing his influence over your life.
And I love how that, as we've spoken about across the episode, is how that translates into social impact. And it's something that we've talked about on the Shock Absorber, is that sometimes Christians are so keen to do social impact they end up watering down the gospel, but I don't feel that from you in any way. I think your social impact is motivated by the cross and impact, and that's where the impact comes from, about what Jesus has done, not what we can do on the earth because, we are Christians. Like, I think there's a real difference to that, and I've been really encouraged by having you on the podcast, so thank you for giving me a hard time putting you on, because I really appreciate it. To finish up, I'm just really thankful that we've had you on, and I think I've learnt a lot, and I really appreciate you again calling just me as myself to take responsibility for my life as a man as well. I think that's really important. So hopefully there are some guys out there that will take encouragement for that as well. So thank you for choosing to come to this church and blessing us with your daughters and yourselves and Jen as well. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Look, you did ask me, and thank you very much for having you. You make out like I said, you've got to have
sorry. You said, hey, I'm happy to go on the podcast if you want. I'm like, oh, great. I was looking for a guest. That's great.
So thanks for having me. Look, I'd like to do, I'll have to fire up the fire pit and get you blokes over. Huh?
Yeah.
All right.
We'll get a few
Let's do
blokes
that.
over.
I love the fire pit. I love fire pits.
The fire pit.
They're good for conversations, aren't they?
They are. It's one of those primeval things, right? You sit around the fire and you watch the bush television burning away.
I've never heard that before.
It's like mesmerising, and the truth comes out of it. And I've done it with my friend. My friend is the chaplain at the army chaplain. We sit around the fire and we talk about life and philosophy, and the way things should be, and everything. It's fantastic. So it's
solve the world's problems.
Yeah, it's a great way to be. And look, and thank you both for having. I'm very encouraged, and thank you for asking me to come on the podcast. And I hope it's been useful. And I just wanted to just say thanks to Soul Revival for doing this podcast, because hopefully it reaches beyond just the three of us having a conversation, and someone today might hear this or one of the previous podcasts, and hopefully that will make a change in their lives.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. We always like to finish with a one way. So if you're happy to one way it with us, let's do that.
One way.
One way.